Can you make a petition?
So good afternoon, everybody. We're coming to you live from the Torch Center, where we have our weekly Talmud Lunch and Learn at 12 o'clock every Friday. And we want to thank Ed for being our host every Friday, making sure that we have either delicious pizza, fresh bagels, or other surprise lunch. So we're deeply grateful to have all of you here. It's a great crowd here. And to all of our friends online, I want to share with you a little thought on this week's Parsha. All right? I want to share with you a little thought on this week's Parsha so we can get into Shabbos feeling uplifted, elevated, excited, and empowered. So we know the Jewish people, prior to receiving the Torah, right? We're just, this week's Parsha, we are just after the life of Joseph. Joseph just passed away. And what the Parsha begins with is that there was a new king who didn't know Joseph. What does that mean? You know, many times people think, the Mishnah tells us, don't kiss up to politicians, because as soon as they go into power, they'll say, who are you? Don't know who you are. Right? And they just like, and we know that this is the reality today. Well, Pharaoh was no different. Pharaoh suddenly doesn't know who Joseph was. Right? It's not that he didn't know who he was. He didn't want to acknowledge the relationship that was there previously. And according to many of the opinions, it was the same Pharaoh. But it was a new circumstance. So it's like a new person. But one of the things is that they decreed is that the Jewish people cannot circumcise their sons. So, as we know, the Jewish people ceased to observe that mitzvah, right, so that not to put themselves at the risk of death. And except for the tribe of Levi. The tribe of Levi kept on observing everything, even at the risk of complete annihilation. And as soon as the Jewish people entered the land of Israel, we know from the book of Joshua, all the boys, all the men got circumcised before entering into the land of Israel. Okay, but there were three things that the Jewish people did not give up on. And they remained different, distinguished from the Egyptians for the entire 210 years of slavery. And those were, number one, they didn't change their names. Number two, they didn't change their language. And number three, they didn't change the way they dressed, their clothes. And if you think about it, they didn't change their names. So they kept their names Moshe, and they kept their names Avraham, and they kept their name, and they didn't change their names to become, the secular names. Michael was, and whatever the names are that are used by non-Jews, they didn't change their names to that. Christopher, right? They kept their Jewish names. Number two, they didn't change languages. They didn't make their Egyptian host language their language. They kept their language of the holy tongue, known as Lashon HaKodesh or Hebrew. That's what they kept as the language. And then they didn't change the way they dressed. Right? All of these three things define your character. They define who you are. Now, we're living in a modern world today where we feel sort of like we have to integrate, we have to assimilate with the world. So we call ourselves by our secular names. Many times I've spoken to people about their Hebrew names, and their Hebrew names, they don't even know their Hebrew names, right? I think it's important for us to realize that we have nothing to be afraid of by being different. There's nothing wrong with being different, right? The Jewish people were always different. In good times and in bad times, we were always different. There's nothing we can do to change that. The only difference is whether or not we're going to embrace it. And I think that we in our generation need to embrace being different. You see, the nations of the world look up at the Jews. They look up at us to be a light unto the nations. not to run away from that responsibility, to distinguish ourselves by being the moral image of what humanity should be. That's what's expected of us. The nations know that. The nations recognize that the Jews are not the same. You think it's a coincidence that in the Security Council they vote against Israel, right? You think that's not a wake-up call for the Jewish people? Get back to the heritage. Get back to your responsibilities. Don't neglect your responsibilities of being an example to the world. That's exactly what it's telling us. When the nations of the world, and by the way, by trying to appease the nations, we're never going to attract them. We're never going to gain one iota. This whole movement of appeasement, of trying to appease the Palestinians, appease the Middle Eastern nations, to appease the Europeans, the Far Asian, it's not going to help. We have to be who we are. We have to maintain our Jewish identity and not try to change it. On the contrary, embrace it. So embrace your Jewish name. Embrace the way we're different. Show the nations of the world what it means to be God's chosen people. Show the nations of the world what it means to be distinguished and holy. Right? What does it say? God says that we need to be a holy and distinguished nation. That's part of our holiness. It's not that we blend in. Yeah, we're nice, and yes, we're polite, and yes, we do business, but we have to show what it means to do business on a higher moral and ethical standing. Right? We need to show what it means to be, look at the state of Israel today. Right? I think that the state of Israel is such an incredible example of what it means to be on a higher level of ethical standard. And what do I mean by that? Israel just completed last week. They completed the construction of a hospital that is completely built for Syrian refugees. Now, I don't know about you, right? But if you have a nation that is sworn to the demise of your existence, would you go out and help them? Why can't they send them to Saudi Arabia? Why can't they send them to Turkey? Why can't they send them to one of the other Arabic nations? Do they have to come to Israel? Yes, because we are an example for the world. Be different, but be better. Don't just be different to be different. Be different so you can be an example. That's what the Jewish people are. And by distinguishing ourselves, we're showing we're up to the challenge. That's what we were chosen for. We were chosen not to be the same. We were chosen to be different. We chose it. And God chose us because we really wanted this. And it's difficult. Yeah, it's difficult. In the world we live today, 2018, it's a challenge for us to feel proud by being different. But that's our job. Our job is not to change our names, not to change the way we dress, not to change the way we speak, to keep our Hebrew, to keep our clothes so that we look different. Yes, we look different. We dress different. And you know what? I remember when we moved to Houston almost 13 years ago. My mother-in-law told me, you should be very careful because I heard there's a lot of it's Bible Belt, a lot of anti-Semitism, this and that. You know what? I haven't experienced one incident, not one incident in 13 years of anti-Semitism. On the contrary, I've been in supermarkets late at night. Thursday night I do an extra run before Shabbos to get whatever my wife needs, the final cooking things. I see this really, really big, intimidating, person, tattooed up. And I'm like, okay, no eye contact. No eye contact. Let's just write, Okay? And I see, I'm walking with my wagon, I'm like, and the person stops. And I'm like, realize, they want to ask me something. So I look, I'm like, shying. And he says, you're the chosen people. We love you. We love Israel. And then they ask me, do you mind explaining me what those strings are? Right? And you're talking about someone who typically I wouldn't want to be stuck in a dark alley with, right? But with such respect, right? We shouldn't be running away. We should be embracing. We should feel proud. That's what the Jewish people, you know what? The Jewish people suffered 210 years, but never let go of that pride. And that's what sustained us. That's what kept us. We don't give up our language. We don't give up our names. And we don't give up the way we dress, the way we carry ourselves. Dress doesn't necessarily mean garments, right? It doesn't mean necessarily a garment. It means the way we carry ourselves, right? It's the way we think about ourselves to ensure that we're not giving up on our identity. It's our identity. Our name identifies us. The way in which we speak identifies us. And the way in which we dress identifies us. Our identity can't be changed. Yes, we'll be in many different circumstances throughout our lives. We'll be in the business world in one, right? We have, different challenges. We'll be in our communities, in our neighborhoods, we'll be challenged with different things. Don't lose your identity. That is the secret to the Jewish survival. We don't give up on our identity. So with that, my friends, thank you all very much for joining us online. And we will continue with our regular Talmud program now. Everyone enjoy your bagels. And have a terrific Shabbos. Thank you so much for joining us.